districts where we have that luxury, right, of getting someone more progressive. Are there any, before we open it up to the audience, we've been talking about this particular issue, but if we're talking about voting and if people are not necessarily single issue voters, and what else, is there something else that you want to tell us about your campaign that you think is relevant?
Oh, sure. Obviously,
especially maybe how you're different in other ways from Carolyn Maloney.
Yeah, look, I just sincerely believe that elections ought to be about the future. That the laws and the rules you're making are about governing future generations. The past has already happened. The present is in peril. But the future we still have agency over. And so in this race, I'm out there talking about a world that does not have 25% of the world's prison population in this country. And my opponent voted for decades for mandatory minimums, for the crime bills, for things like that. I'm out here saying I was the first candidate in this race in the state of New York to call for the defunding of ICE, way before we even found out about family separation and all these other things, because it has been terrorizing communities under previous presidents. And it operates above the rule of law and with impunity. And so now you have a tyrant in the White House. It's just that much worse. And many campaigns have followed suit because of that. But my opponent voted for the 1996 Immigration Reform Act, voted to create ICE in 2001. I don't take corporate PAC money because as a lawyer, I believe, and a business ethics professor, I believe that it is absolutely absurd to take money from the very same companies you regulate and then sit on a financial services committee and regulate them and vote to gut things like Dodd-Frank and then say you're a Democrat that's opposed to Citizens United, because when Republicans call us hypocrites, we are. And I don't believe that, the day that I looked over at my brother and I said, hey, someone should primary Carolyn Maloney, was the day that she voted against President Obama's Iran deal, which follows the time she voted for the Iraq War. And actually, interestingly, if you want to chuckle / be appalled, Google Carolyn Maloney burqa, because she wore a burqa to the House floor in the run-up to the Afghan war to talk about, Islam's treatment of women and praising George W. Bush for balancing war with compassion, which is the most absurd oxymoron I've ever heard. And so I think that there's a judgment question that I have about my opponent, but it doesn't even have to be this way. This is in almost every facet of American life. Our district leads in finance and entertainment and culture and media. We do. And yet we've settled for a complacent status quo for 25 years without challenge when we ought to be leading. I mean, you just said it about New York, and I always talk about this a lot, which is that the world needs New York right now. Desperately needs this dynamic, progressive, aspirational place that people can call home from all across the country, that people can look to be a sanctuary for people like us, people a little bit different. And God, we have an obligation, I think, to then provide the world with representation that reflects real New Yorkers.
I gotta add one more thing I learned about Carolyn Maloney is that she's an anti-vaxxer.
Oh yeah, she's anti-vaxxer.
And as a scientist, that just offends me so much. So yeah.
Sorry, I forgot that one.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, public health crisis what?
Yeah.
I don't even know. Okay. Just putting out there.
So I'm debating tomorrow on New York 1, and I will remember now that is a big one to keep.
Yeah, please do mention that, yeah. Okay. Ken, thanks for this suggestion earlier, but what we didn't mention, maybe that you would like to add, all of you would like to add about what you would like our audience to hear and know about trans sex workers and for Melissa for sex work advocacy and Stoya for pornography related stuff.
Trans people, trans women, period, or trans people, period, are people too. The fact that they might be a sex worker is just an extra perk, depending on how you look at it. But do we deserve to be criminalized? No. Do we deserve to be murdered and killed and beaten? No. I mainly moved to my neighborhood to protect myself because my neighborhood is very different and very nice. But I did that strategically because if I'd moved to a bad neighborhood, I'd be the runner. I'd be somebody running for my life. Imagine all over this damn city, all over, me and exercise don't cut it, but imagine all over this city how many trans women have been beaten up and murdered and killed and arrested, and the list goes on. Just this week, I watched a girl defend herself with a can of freaking Spam. A trans woman. A can of Spam saved her life, coming from shopping. So imagine watching that on Facebook. And these are the stories I'm hearing every day. Did she do something to him? No, they just wanted to attack her. So you add sex work to that, or women having to go back on the street, trans women to do sex work. This law is forcing us to do some real desperate and survival, where we've already been surviving. Now you get to see the real face of survival, because it's putting us at risk.
And actually, before we go on to Melissa and Stoya, there was a question from the audience on Facebook that somebody sent me. How do we get the transgender sex worker community, or the transgender community just period, to get more involved in electoral politics?
They have to know that there's a chance. We've never been an invited community. People they don't invite us to family freaking weddings. Imagine inviting us to be a part of the process to vote. And it's not only me. There are other women out here, black women, Hispanic women, Latin women, French women. Everybody wants to, if they're trans, they want to be a part of this process. But we're not invited into it. So we don't know that this is possible. I don't want to be the only advocate. I'm too damn old. I need somebody younger. And that's one of the things I always try to promote with trans women is school. I need you to go to school. Yeah, you can sell Tic Tacs on the side, bitch, but I need you to go to school. I need you to go to school and get a degree, because if you get a degree, you can help fight. You can be that congressman, that congresswoman. You can be a part of the process. But we need to invite community in so they know there is room and space for them. Mostly, if we walk into a church, you can see the church cuddle up and whisper and stuff. This happens in courts. This happens in every facet of life. It happens when we go into restaurants. It needs to happen in politics. We need to have leaders, trans leaders, that really mean something. I'm not talking who's the lady that ran for office? The short one, Diana Mumford, who lost. I'm not talking about her. I'm talking about somebody that's going to try to win. As long as we try, we will win one day. So we need to be invited in.
I have a few final thoughts. I'm gonna try to be hopeful, because I think that this is a really hard time for the sex worker community, and there's a lot of fear, very much understandably. But I think we're also at a really interesting time where there is, maybe I'm being naive, I can sort of see the tipping point, in conversations and policy around sex work, right? And around sexuality generally, right? This is a larger conversation about sex, and sex positivity, and, my body, my choice, which should and must extend to the sex industry, right? Not just reproductive justice. So I think, we're at a moment in time where there are terrible things happening, but there's also some really fascinating and interesting openings for conversations, and for changes. The Stormy Daniels, Trump situation is an interesting one, right? Where we just had Rudy Giuliani, who's totally deranged asshole, but it's like, just really, he's hated sex and sexuality forever. Hello Times Square being, full of the M&Ms or whatever. When it really should have peep shows everywhere, because that's what Times Square is all about. But this is why I'm never running for. But
don't ask Suraj to say that.
Actually, really funny side note, but I worked for the Ruth Messenger campaign against Giuliani when he was already incumbent mayor in '97. And that the sex shops were an issue. He ran one of his commercials was asking people on the street, "Did you know Ruth Messenger loves sex shops?" And it was like horrified New Yorkers. It was awesome. But so anyway, that aside, I think we're at a really interesting moment where somebody like Rudy Giuliani can make these horrific, terrible statements about sex workers. Right? I don't know if people heard what he said last week about Stormy Daniels, where she has no credibility. And why would I've never watched porn, and why okay, doth protest too much, but and saying that no woman who does that's not a real job and there's no credibility. And then there was backlash, right? So it's horrific that he said that, but it's also we're living in a time and space where there is backlash, right? Stormy's lawyer, right, went at him. Many other people, there was an open dialogue about it. And so I think we're living in a really interesting time with Me Too, where there's much more of a dialogue that is opened up around all of these issues. And so I think and social media can be a blessing and a curse, as we all know. But if we, treat each other with kindness and with openness, especially on these platforms where it is very faceless and where people can spew hatred, but instead, it's show support, show up. As Stoy said, if you have the ability and the privilege to put your face out there, or your support, or your money, or what have you, do it. Because there are power in numbers, and I think we're living in a really interesting time where there is a shift, there is a cultural shift, and it can sometimes feel like we're living in different countries than maybe people in other parts of the United States, or even maybe who are far upstate than New York. But I think that engage, don't run away from those conversations, because that's where change happens. And I think we're sort of living in an exciting time, and we're potentially, there are new candidates, although I cannot advocate for any particular candidate because I am part of a nonprofit. But this is an exciting time where conversations and dialogues are opening up.
I wanted to add, so I'm glad you brought him up, because I was in my head. So Rudy Giuliani dismantled New York. We lost the Fulton Fish Market. We lost gay pride. The reason why we have gay pride the way it is now, with all of this horse corralling, like we're animals, started with Rudy Giuliani. It never happened in New York City. When he became mayor, our main stage taken down. We were shifted off to the bowels of the village. Then it went on to the peep shows. Then it went on, it just kept trickling down and trickling down. So it's no secret that he would come out and speak in defense of Donald Trump. Well, I said his name. Tangerine 45. But he actually came out and spoke. He hasn't been out of his casket in a long time. Why now? It's by design. It's by design. I'm so glad you brought him up. But this is all by design. This man has not showed his face, and now he has a voice and a face again. This is by design. Our leader is trying to fuck us, and hopefully we fuck him in the long run. Can I say that?
Unless Facebook decides to
censor
the Facebook Live because we're talking about it.
Beep, 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 beep.
Stoya?
Has anybody in the room ever pirated pornography and felt a little bit guilty about it?
Yeah.
I see some hands. Okay, now's your chance to pay that back. Show up to things. If you're in the 12th district, vote for the guy who's saying, I'm going to dance around decriminalization instead of just saying no. Sorry.
Zing.
I have ADD. My medication must have worn off. And when you see like a solid infographic explaining succinctly why FOSTA is bad, repost that. That's all I got.
Okay. Okay, we have about 40 minutes for audience questions, so let's open it up. Yeah, sure.
I have
Please keep it short.
a question about sex positivity. Melissa, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting.
Cayenne.
And, I bet all three of you are very familiar with sex positivity. Suraj Patel, I'm wondering what kind of effect does sex positivity, like positivity for your own self, does that have in politics? I didn't word that well.
Let me just repeat the question for the Facebook Live, because probably the microphone is not gonna capture people in the back. So, sex positivity and what kind of meaning that has for you personally, and maybe for your campaign, or how it
Yeah, I mean, I think
affects your views.
What I said earlier about half joking but seriously about morality and legislating morality above my pay grade is true. I don't believe I have any business, and nobody in politics has any business, legislating morality or making it uncomfortable or bad or taboo to talk about sex and sex positivity. It doesn't make any sense, and most of these people are actually hypocrites anyway. That's a well-known thing. So, for me, obviously it informs the way I approach these issues and think about them from the standpoint of, not thinking about this as a taboo thing. We are saying her body, her choice, and why are we saying, except for all of this stuff, simply because, for centuries, because of religious norms or this or that we are going to call that taboo and not anything else. So I don't think, that has any place in, at least for me, the considerations on how I would vote and write laws.
I would like to say we should all, politicians, everybody should be sex positive, because we've seen our First Lady in her underwear. We've never seen that before. We should all be sex positive. We should not have this bill, because according to some of this stuff, that's porno. I'm sorry. I'm just saying.
I'm pretty sure it's literally porno.
I'm sure.
There's
I'm sure.
not much wiggle room there.
I think the Supreme Court would know when it sees it.
No one sees it.
Yeah.
This is for Melissa, a legal question. As someone who's been in the business world and the technology world, we do all kinds of things to get around local laws.
Right.
Like you move your LLC somewhere else, or you do a different country. Are there not ways, this is a legal question, are there not ways to have the servers in a country that does allow this kind of websites? It's the World Wide Web.
Can you repeat?
Can I just stop you right there? That's a no.
But repeat.
We're on Facebook.
Repeat the. Repeat the question. Before.
Okay, he wants to know if there are other ways, like they do everything else, like transfer accounts. Could you do this with ads and?
So.
What you was asking was, could they possibly change?
Can we host a website somewhere besides the United States in order to get around
Again.
this?
Again.
We're using Facebook, which is a U.S. company.
So
Sure.
Another problem is a couple of years ago.
He's the bright one.
We had a case of Visa controlling ads being placed by New Zealand citizens.
You have a very valid question on a closed circuit.
Well, I think that we have seen, and I've been to a few, we hosted a Know Your Rights training where we had a lawyer from Legal Aid who's a tech expert, which I am not. And I've been to a few community meetings where people are sort of putting their heads together to figure out, well, what do we do, right? We have to keep working. And so I think that there have been some sites that have sort of popped up. People have changed sort of encryption techniques. People have changed their email servers. There's been a lot of sort of like tech solutions, but I think I certainly don't know enough about tech and tech savviness to know if those are just band-aids that will ultimately sort of, that cannot cover up a larger gaping wound, like a Facebook, like being a US-based company and having its reach everywhere, like Visa or Chase, these financial institutions that sort of have their fingerprints everywhere. So I think that the answer is that yes, there have been sort of various sites and spaces that have arisen, and I think an overall shift in servers, et cetera, you can tell I'm not a tech person by saying et cetera, people shifting to Proton Mail, different VPN, whatever that means. So there have been shifts, there have been technical shifts, but I think at the end of the day, sort of what Kayan and Stoya were saying is that so many of the US-based companies have such a big reach, it's hard to know how far the tentacles will spread. And so it seems like things might pop up that might seem like a good solution, but then they're shut down or they're sketchy, so they go underground right after taking people's money for ads or what have you. So, I don't know if that sort of answers, but there have been many tech solutions that have certainly popped up.
And the more vulnerable end of our community doesn't necessarily have access to the stuff necessary for encryption or chasing companies as to like who allows
No, at the
what.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, back there.
My question is quite similar to your question. So we've been talking a lot about doing these consequences of this SESTA FOSTA acts. But is there anything we can do just to make sex workers less vulnerable to laws like that, or like
We have to fight.
to reduce the impact this law may cause to them?
Anyone wants to take?
I mean, I think a lot of the solutions and that we've discussed, it's sort of changing who is making these laws so that things, and that's a long-term solution, obviously, things can eventually be changed. Supporting your local sex workers. If someone is a client, giving some extra support, to your local sex workers, or just, so I think financial support is a way of sort of mitigating the economic crisis that FOSTA and SESTA has created for the most marginalized workers. And organizing community, coming together, I think those are all ways to, to try to mitigate.
All the stuff that we're talking about. Yeah.
That's for kind of, since trans women of color, mostly black trans women, led Stonewall and basically the whole LGBTQ plus movement, do you feel supported now by the LGBT, because of its white feminism and its very non-intersexual past? Do you
By
feel supported?
Stonewall?
No, by LGBT.
Oh, Jesus.
By the whole community.
Could you repeat the question?
Oh.
No, Kayan, so that.
So she wanted to know if, because of the whole beginning of Stonewall, which according to academia started with Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, but really happened way before them. They just happen to be the most recognized. There are still living legends that were in that room that they're not talking about, who they honored, but still not talking about. We need to be going to Stonewall to help the trans women, being that Stonewall still today is kind of a little waffly when it comes to letting trans black women, or even acknowledging we're in the room and been in the room. Considering Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera's pictures are in the closet on the back wall, in the back room, that tells you how much they care about the honor of this fight. I think we need to be going to these organizations and the heads of the LGBT organizations, because the T has always been last. We're still categorized and given garbage compared to, say, male sex, compared to the lesbians. We take the full, ass wipe from everybody else. It's not fair, it's not right. And if you add sex work into that, they're like, oh my God, I don't know how, but 2 gay white men can have a baby and be okay. A black trans woman and her husband getting a foster care kid is not okay. I know this because I was a foster care parent. For a long time, they gave me 5 children before they said, you can no longer do this. Why? I did it 5 times. I went into foster care court to get a child back to his mother. Instead, they wanted to put him in a home. I need this child to go home to his mother. If I can make that happen, why couldn't I have a child of my own? So, no, we're not considered, we're like at the bottom of the list. And this comes all the way around. TSA is still fucking with us. I literally had 2 women tell me last month in Arkansas, could they touch me? And I said, yeah, I'm not going in the back room because they wanted to take me in the back room. I was virtually almost naked. I wore a strategic outfit because I knew they were going to ask me. And I lifted up my shirt so they could see my no-ass-at-all jeans. All the bottom is cut out of the jeans. And they were like, and she said she seen something on the screen. And I said, I'm sure you did. And then she said, well, I have to touch you. And I said, you're going to do it right here. And she said, I need my supervisor. And then she touched me, and then her supervisor touched me. If this is a part of the Me Too movement, I own you motherfuckers. Because y'all have just touched me without my consent too many times. But this stuff goes on over and over again.
Yeah.
So I was wondering what the biggest holes in academic research are concerning FOSTA and SESTA. I know it's still really new, but how can we as researchers and journalists get, get in good
Where's Jay Lee? Jay Lee?
What happened to Jay Lee? Oh.
Damn it.
You could, I mean,
Yeah.
Well, I don't know about SESTA FOSTA, but there is not a lot of research. I mean, as far as academic research concerns, there's very little research on sex work, period, especially, and I'm a psychologist, so I can speak from that point of view, and there are only a couple of studies ever published looking at, say, psychological outcomes, like mental health outcomes in terms of sex work, and the couple of the ones that we have show that depending on the type of sex work people are doing, and depending on how much access to the money that they're making they have, and control over the circumstances, how much social support they're getting, how much violence they're exposed to as part of the sex work that they do, and outside of that, the mental health outcomes differ tremendously, right? If these things are on the kind of one end of the spectrum, right, a lot of violence, low social support, low level of control, then their mental health issues like depression, anxiety, PTSD, all of those are through the roof. They're like 90% plus. If you look at the group of people who are on the other end of that spectrum, their mental health outcomes are lower than the general population, right? And so, like, we know those kinds of things, but very, very little other stuff that is kind of high-quality quantitative research being done. So,
journalists can start treating sex work seriously. We know parachute journalism is fucked up when it's a third world country. We know it's unethical when it's a war zone. We need to stop treating it as acceptable when it comes to sex work. There are actual people's lives actually at risk or actually lost because we keep getting it wrong when it comes to undoing the stigma around sex work. We need that to happen as quickly as possible.
And I had one more note around sort of research and all of that. I think, and I'm sure it has been done, but probably not from an academic standpoint, but the economics of prohibition and anti-trafficking efforts that seek to, right, prohibit or end prostitution, which is an absurd notion, but it's sort of an idea of following the money and where, where do the economics fall? I think that would be something, it's not a super sexy topic, but really interesting and compelling because we look at the human, anti-human trafficking movement, the mainstream prohibitionist organizations that are getting millions and millions and millions of dollars. And it's like, to do what? Where are they putting that? And what, how can they measure the impact that all of those millions of dollars that, like, especially like right-wing, church-based, moral groups are pouring in to rescue women, right? So I don't know. That's sort of, I think, would be very interesting.
Another economic angle is you can keep an eye on instances of discrimination in the workplace against trans people, especially trans women, because if we can have an actual intervention there, then that keeps women from having to turn to sex work for survival.
Well, 9 times out of 10, as a trans black woman or a trans woman of color in New York City, you're working for either a non-for-profit, which is sexualizing you and demonizing you and so many things, but that's the only place you can actually work. Some of these people may have doctorates, may really be geniuses, but because you're trans, you're not wanted in that corporate office because your gender has nothing to do with your education. Your gender identity is what you're going to be criminalized for by the employer. So we need laws around that. Discrimination is really huge here for trans women on so many levels. And when we try to say something about it, we're often fired. Look at the Janet Mock story. She had a corporate job working for a magazine. She had a good position until she was outed. She was the same person before she was outed. But once she was outed, she became this person that lost her job and everything. Is this fair? No. But it happens over and over again.
An easy law to target here is this 1964 Civil Rights Act does not include protection for gender and for sexual orientation discrimination. That's not a constitutional amendment or anything. That's a simple statutory change, and one that should be prioritized, I think, by any Congress.
Well, you know, it's so funny. When I said that I was attacked in December, I was attacked. I was put in a precinct by the same precinct that arrested my attacker 2 years ago for kicking a white woman in the face. 2 years prior to that, he kicked a white woman in the face and went to jail. He whipped my ass, left my house, robbed my house, came back while the cops was there, and I went to jail. Department of Civil Rights told me I did not have a valid point. Not against that police station that me and my lawyer went 4 times. 4 times to try to press charges, and they would not even take the charge. So, Department of Civil Rights did not have, they're literally, to receive this news like a couple of weeks ago, you have an invalid case. But he went to jail for kicking a white woman in the face, same precinct that arrested me, and they knew it. They actually quoted it to me as they took me to jail in my onesie.
Yeah, so I was wondering when you guys were talking about allies, there was no conversation around the social media corporations. So SESTA FOSTA does put pressure on them, added costs of monitoring, regulation, censorship. So are they potential allies and interested in...
Clearly, judging by their behavior,
No.
they're not.
No.
They let us know before that law was even a law.
It was happening.
As it was passing the Senate, they were shutting us down, silencing us. Before we even had a chance to wonder. They're like,
There's systems set in places for words. Literally. You can use one word and your whole page could go down. One word could change the demographic of your own personal emails. This is not good.
And initially, the larger conglomerates like Facebook, etc., they were against the law. And then there were some changes that occurred where they then were on board. And so I think once that shift happened, it was done. Because the weight of their their control, their money, right, their lobby, that shift, just smaller companies that maybe would potentially say, oh, this wouldn't be good business. Forget if they even care about sex workers, but just this wouldn't be good business. They didn't stand a chance against it. And I think now, with it having passed, especially the smaller companies that don't have the resources, the funds to do all the screenings, they're just closing, right? Or just broadly censoring. So they're sort of cowering in the corner, understandably. Nobody wants to be charged as a trafficker. So I think it's sort of that opportunity to really develop those relationships didn't happen because the flip of the bigger companies happened very quickly, and then it was like game over.
Do you have a question for Suraj? Just to break it up a little bit.
As a matter of fact, yeah. Suraj, so you were talking about harm reduction specifically as one thing that you would like to employ in order to help the community. Could you be more concrete on what that means for you right now?
Yeah, so I mean, so obvious. Oh, sorry. So asking what harm reduction means.
Or
so
what more specific policies
More
around harm
spec-
reduction
Yeah.
there could be that we could support?
Right, and so instances of the proximate harms that have come about that you've been describing a lot of, whether that's new arrests and around loitering or pimps and things like that. I think that what you do in this is the effects of this law are creating harm. And so once we pinpoint and target those harms, you can actually approach municipalities and places like that and say this, much like we've now shifted. I think the analogy that's easiest is the opioid crisis, because we have seen sort of a shift towards just being like, we've got to get this problem under control because people are dying across the country every single day around this. And so the stigma around needle exchange and all of that, even in the most conservative places in America, has gone away or is going away. And so I think for me, though, when we're talking about trying to say, hey, we need to repeal SESTA and FOSTA, the argument tack that I would take is to say that this is a law that we created that creates harm for no other reason than it was sloppily written, doesn't target trafficking, and is a blunt force instrument for something that we're required a scalpel. And so I think working at that angle might be the best shot we have, at least stopping some of the worst effects of it. Another point just wanted to pull up is that this was a unique thing, the way that this bill was shepherded through really rapidly. Silicon Valley has relied on Facebook and Google to do all of its lobbying for a long, long time. I think there's an inherent danger in monopolies and platform monopolies in this country anyway. And I don't just mean internet giants, but I talk about antitrust enforcement in this country a lot, or lack thereof. Most of us ride one of 3 airlines for 80% of our flights, and they're awful. Most of us buy, two companies sell 99% of toothpaste in America. One company makes 99% of sunglasses in America. And Facebook and Google have an insane amount of market power. It has become the public commons. And if they can silence people, then there's a real issue with that. Relying on Facebook and Google to do all of your, internet freedom lobbying means that one of 2 things can happen. One, Facebook is kind of embroiled in its own mess. And it wasn't coincidental that this bill was passed at the time that Facebook was being grilled in a very public way, because Facebook backed off from lobbying against this bill. Sorry, Facebook. And please don't shut down my account. really, just 2 more weeks. Yeah, and then secondly, so that's one big issue of having those. But yeah, so I think that there's just to answer the last question, a little bit of how muddy the water has got around this issue.
Yeah.
I have 2 questions if we have time for it. The first is, it seems like the immediate response to SESTA FOSTA has been pushing sex workers into other communities, so into dating sites, onto the street. We've seen historically that tends to exacerbate tensions with the existing community. Are we prepared to take the reins on that narrative and let community folks know that the sex workers that they are seeing are not the problem, but are responding to, that are being pushed into their area? And second, sort of related in terms of the response to this law, have we seen a response to the hypervigilance around the trafficking narrative? Have we seen civilian women or interracial couples or people outside of the sex industry whose freedom of movement and freedom of expression is being targeted? Because I know historically, sorry, that's my area, but when sex workers are aggressively targeted, women across the board and other minorities across the board tend to lose freedom of movement, freedom of expression.
I can tackle, I guess, those. So the first question, or first issue around, sex workers maybe being in other spaces, I mean, I think it's really interesting to see what will happen, especially with dating sites and, fetish sites and, all sorts of just consensual sexual activity that's happening online. And I've heard of various things, and maybe people are more familiar than I am, but, of different sites. I know FetLife. I don't know what they ended up deciding. I think is FetLife still open?
So Fet keeps their profiles of pro-doms, not financial doms, available.
Okay.
Otherwise, all other sex workers are not allowed.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I know that
sex workers are not allowed on FetLife.
Right.
Aside from pro-doms, who are not financial doms.
Right. And so it is, right, and it has already spilled over to, invading, and I mean invading, I don't mean sex workers invading, but this censorship invading, non-paid sexual activity, right?
Like
Tinder. Casual encounters, right? There's a million websites, so it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, because we can't shut down every dating website. Like, that would be bonkers, and are they going to start monitoring for various words that they think, that they read in a book? It means, sex work or something totally insane. So it'll be, I think, really interesting to see how, and every website like FetLife, right, is deciding where to draw the line for themselves. But again, it's all, we keep pushing the line and the boundaries, keep getting drawn, and, in the end we'll have to have some kind of larger moral reckoning. But until then, we'll see what happens. And then in terms of the second issue, now I'm blanking.
Hypervigilance impacting non-sex workers.
Yes, so that's really very high level. Okay.
Last week, Instagram banned the women hashtag.
Right.
We've seen some enormous overreach.
Totally.
I do know in the village, I was out there twice this week doing interviews. They're like full-on police units, bright lights and the whole nine. I was out there 3 weeks before that speaking, and none of that existed. 4 weeks before, none of it. Now it's like full-on stations here and there of lights and more police activity where there hasn't even been street work like it used to be, or that kind of trafficking late night. Both nights we were there Thursday and Friday, both nights. It was special. Like I said, they tried to pick up our Canberra girl who is trans, and she was terrified because she had never been in that sort of situation. And she was like, the guy just offered me, to take care of me if I go on a date. And I was like, no, he wants you to work for him. And she was like, what? And this is just common. That you put this out here, and now this is the go-to. This is the hunt they had. My girlfriend told me somewhere up New York, I'm not going to say where because I'm smart, but somewhere up New York, they're like fully back. I won't go and test the waters to see how the girls are doing, but I know where they are. And it's not good, but it's back again.
Yeah.
Question I have, so often in movements of government repression, the first pushback we see is this kind of like representation, like with the Black Lives Movement, like, putting a Black Lives Matter poster in $1 million home. And aside from that, within community, you've seen more like kind of sex workers redistributing funds to more marginalized sex workers. So my question is, how do we, aside from representation, like posting on social media, caring about SESTA and FOSTA, how do we bring the message to supporters and community that the funding is actually like a really serious issue that's going to continue to keep people alive, whether it's through clinics or redistributing funds to resources and organizing, keeping people alive in that way.
What I've learned just recently, and this was just recently thanks to Mel's Know Your Rights thing, because I spoke to some people right after. So even trying to get funds, we can't say it's for sex workers. We can't say it's for sex worker organizations to help. It's to help community. And ironically, a lot of the GLBT community have either or have tried or been around or are doing or engaging in some kind of sex. We need help.
I was just going to add to that. Yeah, I think everybody amplifying, voices, people that, can, and whether financially or putting their face out there, reposting, retweeting, talking to neighbors, talking to friends, and just, amplifying these issues.
And let's say next week you've forgotten sore, glitz, etc. A good rule of thumb for should I trust this organization is, do I see people who've actually done the specific kind of work out in front? Yes, then it's probably an okay one. If there are no sex workers to be seen, be very suspicious. They might not know what they're talking about, and they might not really be helping. NGOs.
I'm not scared to be outed. I was outed by a senator, a governor. I was outed years ago. So I'm doing the work that they actually forced me into. I would have never known about sex worker advocacy or activism or nothing until I actually got arrested. And then it turned me into this diehard. Before that, I was an underpaid social worker for an organization for years and used to full capacity. And now I'm doing something that has a meaning and a cause with people that are doing something that has a meaning and a cause.
We have time for one more question. Yes, Beth.
Are many of these Democrats who voted for this law feeling backlash and getting the message that people are not happy about this? Is that getting to them?
I mean,
are we talking
not yet, I don't think. This will be the first round of elections. It's only been a few months. So I would say not yet, not at all. I know that we've had, ever since we came out pretty strongly against this law, quite a bit, some press, I guess Huffington Post today wrote a long-form piece about the anti-SESTA FOSTA backlash movement. I know that the Carol Maloney spokesman declined to comment. So for a lot of people, this is just a fringe issue that will die if we let it die. I think you've got to, it's not going to make people feel heat until it actually actualizes into heat.
Well, could we start by saying Phony Maloney is never really like sex workers? Let's start there. So it could be all over Facebook and whatever internet. This woman does not support us. We should not support her. I'm just putting it out there.
And so, people who are in the 12th district have a very specific thing that they can do, support Suraj, but what about other people who are not in this district? Is there any way to get these Democrats feel some of the heat?
Yeah, first off, I think that we are I'm probably the most vocal and out front candidate on this against somebody who is very proud of the SESTA FOSTA bill that she passed. And so if there's a sort of marquee race for proving that this backlash is real, then this is it. June 26th is 2 weeks from tomorrow. And even if you're not in the 12th Congressional District, I'd encourage you to do several things. Tell people to vote on June 26th. This is, like I said, a 7% turnout election, and so every single vote matters. Single best way to get people to vote is peer-to-peer referrals, just like any product. And so you telling your friends, posting about this is a huge, huge help to us. And so I think we really made this a front and center issue, and I can guarantee you that that message would be pretty strongly delivered if one of the sort of chief architects of this bill were defeated by somebody who said that this is a ridiculous law. So June 26th, like I said, it's just 2 weeks from tomorrow, but letting people know, publicizing this election is our first hurdle. I always say that I'm going to go back into politics and with this for a second, is that these people have been content, and I say these people, the Democratic establishment in the city is content with 7% turnout year after year after year, with the same exact people voting, and totally cool with these elections coming and going without anyone knowing about them. That's within the middle of the summer. New York is one of the most voter suppressive states in the country. We're consistently below 40th in turnout, with some of the most strict laws in the country around voting. And so I say, when I go around to Greenpoint, Williamsburg, Lower East Side, and parts of this district that aren't even targeted by her campaign, is that they don't want you to vote. If they wanted you to vote, she'd be out asking for your vote. But instead, this election is about two campaigns. One, hiding the ball and trying to run out the clock on the election to win and be content with such apathy in the electorate. And the other that is trying to expand the electorate, register new voters, get new voices involved. And whenever you're choosing between two candidates, absent any other information, err on the side of the one that's trying to actually get more voices and more ideas involved. So I would ask that if you could help us out by posting and all those things, that'd be great. And just like everybody else, we're obviously up here trying to. We run the most negative profit company of the group up here, because I definitely am going to be out of money here on June 26th, no matter what. So we're always raising money as well. So if you know folks, that's also a big help.
The fact that New York State has one of the most restrictive voter suppression laws, or whatever you want to call them, that came as a surprise to me. I recently learned about that. How many people did not know that and thought New York was doing great as far as voting is concerned? Yeah, a fair amount.
When North Carolina passed its extremely racist voter ID law, and it was defending itself in the Fifth Circuit, in its brief it wrote, if you think this is bad, look at New York. Dead serious. And so we have to register 30 days out before the election. So if you've decided now you like this candidate, which, by the way, most people pay attention to an election 7 days out, right?
And I live in a neighborhood that is predominantly Indian, all types. But you're not in that neighborhood.
I'm not in that neighborhood. These districts are drawn in a really funny way. But
it's too late to register.
It's too late to register. You don't have automatic voter registration here. You don't have same-day registration here. You don't have vote by mail without having to give a reason here. We don't have early voting here. It's pathetic. It's pathetic, and it's a single-party city, and I think it's just content with not having competition. But competition fuels democracy. It is necessary to keep people's feet to the fire. It is necessary to create innovation in policy, desperately needed right now. And so, help us publicize the election.
And even though it's too late to register for these primaries, you can still do it while you're thinking about it, so you don't get caught under 30 days again next year. Or whenever they do. Yeah, 2 years. Thanks. I make pretty pictures of people doing it. Track of what year the voting is.
Okay, on that note, I think it's a good place to end this. Thank you so much for being here, all our panelists. Thank you all. We're gonna move outside and upstairs, right? Right? So up here and through that exit door, and have some snacks and some wine upstairs, and sort of hang out with everybody.